Have you ever seen a situation where power dynamics suddenly shift? Imagine, for a moment, trying to cheat someone only to find out they hold the power to change your life. What would you do? And what if the tables turned in a way that was completely unexpected? In today's video, we're diving into a shocking story that has both irony and drama. Two officers thought they were pulling a fast one on a man they thought was just another target. But there was one thing they didn't know. He was about to become their new boss. How could they have missed the signs? And what happens when someone who's wronged gains the upper hand? We'll walk through the details of this twist of fate, where assumptions and hidden identities collide. You'll learn about the hidden elements of this story and some lesser-known facts that make it even more powerful. This isn't just a tale of a surprise revelation. It's a story about how actions always have consequences, sometimes in the most unexpected ways. So stick around until the end to uncover how this scenario unraveled and just how quickly the tables can turn. From first impressions to final outcomes, you won't want to miss any part of this journey. This isn't just a story of right and wrong, but a look at the unexpected ways life can flip the script when you least expect it. Let's get into it. Imagine a quiet street where things seem calm and normal. The air is thick with a sense of everyday life, and for these two officers, it's just another day on duty. But what they don't know is that their routine is about to lead them straight into a twist of fate they never saw coming. The two officers sit in their patrol car, glancing around for anything that might catch their eye. These men have been in their positions long enough to know the street's usual characters: the shop owners, the regulars, the passers-by. They think they know who belongs and who doesn't. This day, however, they spot someone who catches their attention. A black man is standing by his car, dressed neatly but casually, as though he's waiting for something or someone. The officers exchange a look, and with a silent agreement, they decide to approach him. Maybe it's the way he looks, too calm, too collected, or maybe it's just a slow day, and they're looking for some action. They step out of their patrol car and walk over, their footsteps slow and deliberate, the kind that signals control. As they approach, one of them casually calls out, "Hey, mind if we ask you a few questions?" The man looks up, polite but clearly caught off guard. "Of course," he replies, a hint of confusion in his eyes. He doesn't seem like he has anything to hide, but that doesn't matter to the officers. In their minds, this is their moment of authority. They're in control, and he's just another face in the crowd, someone without power, without any real connection to their world. The questioning quickly becomes more intense. The officers start digging, trying to find any reason to extend the conversation. One of them asks to see his ID. There's a flash of hesitation, but he obliges, handing over his identification. The officers glance at the ID briefly, but don't seem too interested in the details. It's almost as if they're on autopilot, searching for an excuse to flex their authority, to prove that they have the upper hand. Then one of them makes a bold move. While pretending to examine his ID, the officer subtly slides a hand into the man's pocket and pulls out a small roll of cash. The man notices, of course. How could he not? But he says nothing. Maybe he's waiting to see what they'll do next, or maybe he's already calculating his options, trying to decide whether to speak up or stay silent. For the officers, this is just another takedown, just another day on the job where they feel invincible. They think they've got this guy pegged, a man with a bit of cash, maybe a suspicious background. They don't see him as anyone important, anyone worth worrying about. In their minds, they've already won, and their authority is unshakable. They feel powerful, smug even, as they pocket the money without a hint of shame. Little do they know, this casual display of power will come back to haunt them in ways they can't even imagine. Now let's talk about the man in question. The man those officers thought they could outsmart. He doesn't seem extraordinary at first glance. He's dressed in a simple, yet stylish way that doesn't scream wealth, but hints at a certain level of class. His demeanor is calm, and there's a quiet confidence in the way he stands. He's not the type to make a scene or attract attention, but there's something about him that sets him apart from the crowd, though the officers don't pick up on it. To them, he's just another person on the street, easy to overlook, easy to underestimate. But they missed the subtle details. If they'd looked closer, they might have noticed that he carries himself with an ease that's unusual. He's not a man who's nervous around authority, and there's no fear in his eyes as they question him. When they demand his ID, he hands it over without hesitation, as if he has nothing to hide. And why would he? After all, this man is no ordinary person. They just don't know that yet. In truth, he's someone who's worked hard to get to where he is. He's someone who has risen above countless challenges, someone who's earned his place in a world that once tried to keep him out. This man didn't inherit wealth or privilege. He carved his own path, step by step. It's not obvious by looking at him, but he's a powerful figure, someone with influence and authority. He doesn't need to flaunt it, and he certainly doesn't feel the need to prove it to anyone, least of all to these two officers who see him as just another face on the street. What makes this man truly remarkable is his patience. He's seen situations like this before, people who misjudge him because of his appearance, people who assume they're superior because of their badge or their position. He's learned to stay calm, to let people think what they want. Over time, he's come to realize that actions speak louder than words, and he's always known that the truth has a way of revealing itself, sooner or later. As he stands there, watching the officers walk away with his money, he doesn't react. He doesn't shout or protest. Instead, he lets them go, his face betraying no emotion. To the officers, this is a sign of weakness, proof that he's powerless against them. But in reality, this man is simply playing the long game. He knows that confronting them now would accomplish nothing. Instead, he files away every detail of this encounter. Their faces, their voices, the way they spoke to him as if he were beneath them. He knows he'll see them again, but on his terms, not theirs. This man is the kind of person who believes in justice, but he also understands the value of timing. He's no stranger to conflict, but he's learned that sometimes the best way to win is to wait. And so he waits, letting them believe they'd gotten away with it, letting them walk away with a false sense of victory. What they don't realize is that this man is far from finished with them. In his world, every action has a consequence, and he's already thinking about how this encounter will play out. As he watches them disappear down the street, he reflects on his journey to this point. He remembers the obstacles he had to overcome, the people who doubted him, the system that tried to hold him back. Every step he's taken has been a struggle, but he's never given up. And now he's finally in a position where he can make a difference, where he can use his influence to bring about real change. He's not a man who seeks revenge, but he believes in accountability, and he knows that these officers will soon learn the meaning of that word. It's been a few days since the encounter on that quiet street. The two officers go about their routines, completely unaware of the storm brewing just out of sight. To them, that moment was nothing more than a casual encounter, just another guy they thought they could intimidate and take advantage of. They've likely forgotten about it by now, moving on without a second thought. Little do they know, their world is about to flip upside down. Today is an important day at the station, a day of introductions. Word has spread that a new chief is taking over, a powerful figure rumored to have an impressive background. There's a buzz of excitement and curiosity among the officers, each of them wondering what changes this new leader will bring. Most of them are gathered in the briefing room, a low hum of voices filling the air as they exchange guesses and whispers about their new boss. The two officers are there, too, joking casually about how every chief starts with grand plans, but eventually just lets things slide. They share a smirk, feeling untouchable, confident in their own routine. They're not concerned with the arrival of the new boss. After all, in their minds, they've seen it all before. But as the door opens and a hush falls over the room, they find themselves looking up in unison, expecting to see a stranger, someone unfamiliar and authoritative. Instead, their jaws nearly drop as the man from the street steps in, wearing a suit that radiates authority and composure. There's a flicker of recognition, a moment of disbelief. For a second, they're paralyzed, trying to reconcile the image of the man they took money from with the polished, commanding figure standing in front of them now. But there's no mistaking him. It's the same man, the one they thought was powerless, the one they thought was just another person they could control. The new chief surveys the room, his gaze steady and calm, pausing for just a fraction of a second when he reaches the two officers. They can feel the weight of his stare, a silent message that only they can understand. The rest of the room remains oblivious, watching him with admiration and respect, but the two officers can feel their confidence draining. Their smug expressions fade, replaced by a mixture of shock and dread. With a calm voice that commands the room, the new chief begins to introduce himself, sharing just enough of his background to leave no doubt about his authority and capability. He speaks of his commitment to justice, his dedication to accountability, and his belief in fairness. His words are measured, his tone unwavering, each sentence laced with an underlying strength that leaves no room for doubt. He may not mention the encounter from days ago, but his words carry a hidden edge, as if they're directed squarely at the two officers who thought they'd gotten away with it. As he continues, they can feel the tension building, a slow, creeping realization that their actions have come back to haunt them. Every word he speaks feels like a subtle reminder of the moment they thought they had control, only to find themselves now standing on the edge of exposure. They shift uncomfortably, hoping he won't call them out directly, praying he won't make this moment personal. But even without saying it, the new chief has made it clear. He remembers them, and he remembers everything. When he finishes his speech, he walks around the room, shaking hands and exchanging introductions with each officer. The two men stand rigid, bracing themselves as he approaches, their minds racing with questions. Will he confront them here, in front of everyone? Will he make an example out of them? The suspense is almost unbearable, a silent torment as they wait to see what he'll do. Finally, he reaches them, extending his hand with a calm smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes. They shake his hand, forced to meet his gaze, feeling the weight of his unspoken message. In that moment, they understand that he holds all the power now. He could ruin their careers, expose them in front of their colleagues, bring down the full weight of his authority on them. But instead, he simply greets them, his tone polite but distant, leaving them to wonder what he's thinking, what he's planning. As he moves on, they exchange a nervous glance, realizing that their fate now lies in his hands. The man they tried to cheat has become their superior, the one person who can decide their future. The power they once held over him has vanished, replaced by a vulnerability they never thought they'd feel. The big reveal has left them exposed, their confidence shattered, forced to confront the reality that their actions have consequences they can no longer control. Days pass, and the tension lingers in the air like an impending storm. The two officers, once so confident in their positions, are now walking a tightrope of anxiety. They try to go about their daily routines, but every time they see the new chief, their stomachs churn. They can feel his eyes on them, a constant reminder of their misdeeds. The authority they once wielded with such arrogance has transformed into an unseen weight on their shoulders. In the days that follow, the new chief begins to implement changes. At first, it's subtle, a new focus on community relations, an emphasis on transparency, and discussions about accountability. The officers exchange worried glances during briefings, whispering among themselves about what this could mean for them. They can't shake the feeling that their actions are under scrutiny, that the chief is watching and waiting. It's unsettling, the way he seems to know just when to enter a room or when to appear at the precinct. He's always nearby, always observant. Then comes the day of the first community meeting. The chief has arranged for an open forum, inviting local residents to voice their concerns about policing in the area. The officers know they'll be attending, and the idea makes them uneasy. They've seen how this chief values community input, how he's willing to listen. They also know the community has a long memory, and they wonder what might happen if the chief reveals what they've done. As the meeting begins, the atmosphere is electric. Residents fill the room, some eager to speak out, others just there to listen. The chief stands at the front, commanding the room with an air of authority and calm. He encourages open dialogue, emphasizing the importance of trust between the police and the community. The officers sit at the back, feeling increasingly exposed, their palms sweaty and their hearts racing. One by one, people stand to speak, sharing their experiences, stories of mistreatment, of feeling disrespected by those who are supposed to protect them. With each story, the officers shift uncomfortably in their seats. They can sense the growing tension in the room, a palpable energy that hangs heavy in the air. The chief listens attentively, nodding along, and every so often, he glances back at the officers, his expression unreadable. Finally, a woman stands up, her voice trembling with emotion. She talks about her brother, a man who was stopped by the police one night and ended up on the wrong side of a bad encounter. Her words resonate throughout the room, echoing the frustrations that have long simmered beneath the surface. The officers can feel the weight of her pain, and it strikes a chord deep within them. They know they're part of a system that has let people down, and the guilt washes over them like a wave. Then, as if sensing the moment is right, the chief steps forward. His voice is steady, but filled with a quiet intensity that draws everyone's attention. He thanks the woman for her courage in sharing her story, then pauses for a moment, letting the silence settle. It feels like time stands still as he turns to the officers. "I want to address something directly," he says, his tone serious. "We all have a responsibility to uphold the law and serve our community with integrity." The two officers exchange anxious glances, their hearts pounding in their chests. The room is silent, and the weight of the moment feels almost suffocating. The chief continues, "We must be accountable for our actions. The trust of the people is not something we can take for granted." With those words, he locks eyes with the officers, and it's as if he's peeling back layers of their bravado, exposing the truth they've tried so hard to bury. For the first time, they feel vulnerable, the walls they've built around themselves beginning to crumble. The chief's gaze feels like a spotlight, illuminating their past mistakes and laying them bare for everyone to see. The audience watches, a mix of curiosity and anticipation in their expressions. Will the chief reveal their wrongdoings? Will he make an example of them in front of the very community they have disrespected? As the meeting unfolds, the chief shares his vision for a department that values accountability and transparency, one that strives to rebuild the relationship with the community. He speaks passionately, and for the officers, each word feels like a ticking clock, counting down to their reckoning. They can't escape the feeling that this moment is leading to something inevitable, something they can't control. The meeting wraps up, but the unease remains. As the crowd disperses, the officers linger, hoping to escape unnoticed. But the chief approaches them, his demeanor cool but purposeful. "Can we talk?" he asks, and in that moment, the air feels electric with tension. They nod, hearts racing, as they follow him to a quieter corner of the precinct. Once they're alone, the chief looks them in the eye, and for the first time, the officers see a flicker of something deeper, disappointment, perhaps, or maybe a resolve that's unshakable. "I know what you did," he says, his voice steady, "and I won't tolerate it." The words hang in the air, heavy with consequence. The officers feel their hearts sink, a mix of fear and realization washing over them. They've been found out, and there's no escaping the truth now. As the days turned into weeks, the tension between the two officers and their new chief deepened. Rumors swirled through the precinct like smoke from a fire, whispering of the chief's intent to take action. Officers who once viewed their colleagues as comrades now looked at them with suspicion, a growing divide forming between those who upheld the law and those who sought to exploit it. The community outside the precinct began to notice the shift. The chief's community meetings were gaining traction, and word spread about his determination to foster transparency and accountability within the department. Many residents expressed their support for him, sharing stories of their struggles and frustrations with the police. The officers could feel the atmosphere shifting. They were no longer untouchable. Instead, they were part of a narrative that placed them as the villains in a story that needed a resolution. One evening, the local news broke the story about the two officers. The headline read, "Two officers under investigation for alleged theft from black man." It was a bombshell that rocked the community. Suddenly, the officers were thrust into the spotlight, their faces splashed across screens, their names now synonymous with betrayal and corruption. As they sat in their living rooms, watching the news unfold, a cold dread gripped them. Their lives were spiraling out of control, and there was no way to escape the fallout. The next day, protests erupted outside the precinct. Crowds gathered, holding signs that demanded justice and accountability. No justice, no peace. They chanted, their voices ringing loud and clear. The officers watched from inside, feeling the weight of the crowd's anger pressing against the walls. They could see the determination in the faces of those outside. Mothers, fathers, children, all standing up for what they believed was right. The officers had become the embodiment of the very issues the community fought against, and they were acutely aware of it. One protester, a young man named Malik, stood at the forefront. He had a personal connection to the story. He was the brother of the man from whom the officers had stolen. As he spoke into the megaphone, his voice trembled with emotion. "My brother worked hard for everything he had. He was a good man. These officers thought they could take what they wanted, but we're here to say enough is enough." The crowd erupted in cheers, and the officers felt a sense of helplessness wash over them. They were no longer in control of their narrative. It had been taken from them. Back inside the precinct, the atmosphere was thick with unease. Officers exchanged uneasy glances, knowing that their colleagues were being scrutinized under a harsh light. The chief stood at the front, rallying his department, emphasizing the need for unity and integrity. He acknowledged the pain and anger in the community, urging his officers to reflect on their roles. "We are public servants. We must do better," he declared, his voice strong. But the weight of the officers' guilt hung heavy in the air. They had let down not only the community but also their fellow officers who genuinely cared about their work. As the protests continued, the media coverage grew relentless. News anchors dissected the events, bringing in experts and commentators to discuss the implications of the officers' actions. Conversations about police reform surged, reigniting debates that had been simmering for years. Calls for justice rang out across social media, with hashtags trending for weeks. The officers' names became synonymous with a movement demanding accountability and change within the police force. In the midst of this chaos, the chief faced mounting pressure. Community leaders reached out, demanding answers, and the mayor called for an internal investigation. Tensions escalated as the officers' fates hung in the balance. Could they be fired? Charged? The uncertainty gnawed at them, feeding their anxiety and paranoia. They began to feel like ghosts in their own lives, moving through a world that no longer felt safe or familiar. Rumors began to circulate that charges were being filed, and the officers braced for the worst. Their families felt the strain too. Wives and children faced the judgmental stares of neighbors and friends, the stigma of their loved ones' actions hanging over them like a dark cloud. As the officers returned home, they found solace in solitude, a burden they couldn't share. Their world had become a prison, each moment filled with dread and shame. In the days that followed, the public reaction continued to unfold. Community members rallied together, hosting discussions on how to improve relations between the police and the public. Town halls were organized, where residents could voice their experiences and suggestions for change. The officers' actions became a catalyst for a movement that sought to bridge the divide between law enforcement and the community it served. It was a painful awakening for everyone involved, a moment of reckoning that could not be ignored. And amid this turmoil, a storm brewed within the precinct itself. Whispers of loyalty and betrayal swirled, forcing officers to choose sides. Some openly supported the chief, applauding his efforts to reform the department. Others remained loyal to the two officers, believing they were being unfairly targeted. The camaraderie that once defined the police force began to fracture, splintering under the weight of accountability and justice. As tensions mounted, the pressure on the officers increased. They knew the chief was determined to bring the truth to light, and with each passing day, they felt the walls closing in. The community was demanding justice, and they could feel the heartbeat of change resonating around them. They were on the verge of losing everything: their jobs, their reputations, and ultimately, their sense of self. As the days passed, the consequences of the officers' actions became increasingly evident. It wasn't just the fallout within the precinct or the public outcry that haunted them. It was the personal cost that weighed heavily on their shoulders. Each man had a family, friends, and a life built around a badge that now felt like a shackle. They had gone from protectors to pariahs, and the reality of their situation settled in like a thick fog. Inside their homes, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The laughter and lighthearted banter that once filled their living rooms had been replaced by an uneasy silence. Their families walked on eggshells, the tension palpable in the air. One officer, Derek, had a young daughter named Mia who loved to play dress-up with his uniform. But now, when she pulled it from the closet, he felt a wave of guilt wash over him. How could he put on the symbol of authority, the very symbol of trust, when he had betrayed that trust so completely? He found himself avoiding her hopeful eyes, fearing the questions she might ask. At family gatherings, whispers followed them like shadows. Relatives who once supported them now looked at them with pity and disappointment. Derek's brother, a former police officer himself, confronted him during a barbecue. "How could you do this, man? You're supposed to be better than this." The words hit like a slap, and Derek felt the shame burning in his chest. He had let everyone down, including himself. Meanwhile, the other officer, Tom, faced similar struggles. He had been married for over a decade, and his wife, Lisa, had always been proud of his career. But now she felt betrayed, not just by the public, but by the man she thought she knew. The trust they had built was crumbling, and every time she looked at him, it was as if she were searching for the person she once loved. "I don't even recognize you anymore," she said one evening, her voice breaking. Those words hung in the air, a stark reminder that their actions had consequences far beyond the badge. As the investigation unfolded, the two officers found themselves isolated, not only from the community but also from their colleagues. While some officers rallied to support them, others kept their distance, afraid of being associated with the scandal. The camaraderie that once bound them together had fractured. Officers who had shared coffee breaks and casual conversations now exchanged cold glances, the room thick with tension. They were no longer viewed as partners in service. Instead, they were seen as potential liabilities. Public opinion had shifted dramatically, and with it, the officers' standing in the community. Protests continued to grow in size and intensity, with banners demanding justice for the man they had robbed. The hashtags exploded on social media, drawing attention not just to their actions, but to the systemic issues within law enforcement. Every day, their names became synonymous with corruption, and the news cycle churned relentlessly. No matter where they turned, they were reminded of their failure. The officers' dread deepened when they received notices of disciplinary hearings. The chief, standing firm on his promise of accountability, was determined to see justice served. Their hearings would be a public spectacle, a place where they would have to face not only their peers, but also the very community they had wronged. As they prepared for the hearings, a sense of impending doom settled over them like a shroud. Each man was left alone with his thoughts, haunted by the knowledge that their lives were about to be laid bare before everyone. In the weeks leading up to the hearings, Derek and Tom attempted to reach out to their families, hoping to find solace and support. But every conversation turned into an argument, a painful reminder of the rift their actions had caused. Lisa, overwhelmed with emotions, expressed her frustration. "I just don't understand how you could do this. You were supposed to protect people." Each accusation pierced deeper, reinforcing the belief that they were irrevocably changed. The love and respect they once enjoyed were now marred by betrayal. As the date of the hearings approached, the officers were plagued by anxiety. They couldn't escape the feeling that their entire lives hinged on what would happen next. Would they lose their jobs? Would they face criminal charges? Each question echoed in their minds, a relentless reminder of the choices they had made. They tried to find comfort in one another, but the bond between them was strained. Each man was grappling with his own guilt, and there was little space left for solidarity. On the day of the hearing, the precinct was abuzz with tension. Officers gathered, many wearing expressions of concern, unsure of how to react to the unfolding drama. The chief addressed the assembly, outlining the gravity of the situation and the need for integrity within the force. His words echoed through the room, and the officers felt a collective weight pressing down on them. The chief's resolve was clear. He would not tolerate any form of corruption. As Derek and Tom entered the hearing room, they were met with a sea of faces, some sympathetic, others judgmental. The atmosphere was thick with uncertainty. The panel of senior officers and community leaders waited, their expressions serious. Each moment felt like an eternity, every heartbeat echoing the anxiety that filled the room. Derek glanced at Tom, and in that fleeting look, they both understood the gravity of the moment. As the proceedings began, the reality of their situation sunk in. They would have to relive that night, the decisions they made, and the impact of those decisions on the community. Each question posed to them felt like a knife, cutting deeper into their already fragile state. The public had already made up its mind, and they were painfully aware that the officers were now seen as the enemy. The hearings unfolded with a chilling intensity, the panel's questions probing their actions and motivations. Every word was dissected, every excuse scrutinized. As they spoke, they felt the weight of their mistakes pressing down on them. Their attempts to explain their actions fell flat, met with skepticism and disbelief. The truth was, there were no justifications for what they had done. Each testimony felt like a chain binding them to their fate, and the audience's reactions were a constant reminder of the anger and hurt they had caused. Throughout the day, the consequences of their actions became glaringly apparent. As the hearings drew to a close, the officers were left with the grim reality that their lives would never be the same. The community's trust had been shattered, and the path to redemption seemed impossibly distant.